Hi folks, my name's Warbass. Welcome back. You're looking today again at the A case. And before we get into the patch that you just heard that I actually haven't recorded yet as the time of recording this voiceover, I want to talk a little bit about sampling in general, how I approach sampling sources in the past, and more specifically get to something that I use a lot lately, and a really specific aspect of it that I just want to share and talk about. So over the course of making music for the past couple decades, I've done a lot of different kind of sampling based work. Maybe like 15 years ago, I made an album on a laptop, purely cutting up snippets of songs that I had in my iTunes library without knowing anything about sound design. Literally every individual sample was raw, straight from the track. Sounded kind of goofy in hindsight, but some of it was kind of nice. Earlier iterations of this case on my channel were really focused around sampling FM radio, which I don't live near a lot of stations. I have got this little module that can pick up a local gospel station, and I used to sample that a lot, and that would sound like this. I do a lot of acoustic instrument sampling. I'll play guitar into something. You'll see me use my kid's piano or toy piano at different times. One of the things I sample most often lately is actually just my record collection. It's not huge. It fills the cabinet that these two synthesizers sit on top of, and so it's just been right out of view essentially this whole time. The bottom row of the whole cabinet is essentially hand-me-downs and oldies records from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then my grandparents' record collection, a lot of Bing Crosby, Christmas stuff, and then some really old things from like the 20s and 30s on these super thick dinner plate style 45 records. I've sampled all different kinds of stuff. So I used to do a lot of music off of using one of these, similar to what I talked about with the full album made just on Cubase with raw samples. I did, I think, I don't know how many songs, but a lot where I would take one single sample off of those super old 45s into the tracker and only use that one loaded sample transformed in a dozen different ways to make some weird noisy music that sounded like this. Within my two cases here, I've also most recently posted a video sampling a collection of records that I have, which are these kind of late 90s, early 2000s bulk single 12-inch records that contain acapella tracks, instrumental tracks, radio edits, the kind of original album version, but I got for 25 cents each that I bought kind of blind at a record store probably 10 years ago. And I had flipped through those really not knowing what is in there still, pulling something out, and we'll throw that on the record player. And sometimes some nice things happen. But there is a quarter of my record collection that is kind of unique. And I'm going to play a handful of tracks from that collection that I've actually all recorded straight off my record player into one big loop here. So I just kind of swapped albums out on my record player that sits a little over there, but it's plugged in just to these Bafako instrument interfaces. And there is one track that I think is my favorite because it really kind of explains the whole chunk of the collection. So I'm just going to play that for you through the looper for the sake of being able to talk about these things, and then we'll listen to a bunch of different things and talk for a bit.
This is the sound of the century. Musical commercials from Century 21 Productions in Dallas. This tape is about popular music, America's most popular and well-known music. Familiar music you've probably heard a few times yourself. Look up, America, look up, America, more songs to sing, yeah. Look, more bells to ring up, America, more of the real thing.
So what you're hearing is the B-side track on this album by Century 21 Productions, the professional production library, and it is their client demonstration track. So it's a full side of the record that just talks through essentially the value proposition of what is a syndicated physical sample library on vinyl records that they would sell and mail to radio stations all over the country so that they could use the different samples to produce radio commercials. Coming up in a second is going to be some tracks from side A. Here we go. It's 11 seconds long.
We've got more music.
That was it. Up next, the hit, 15-second track, Wake Up, ... every morning.
Wake up every morning.
So these songs kind of fall into one of three categories. This particular library, which is at least 24 discs long, I don't have all 24, I maybe have a dozen or so, is a lot of vocal slogans that could be applied to lots of different businesses. Some more generic and just positive, some about more producing things that aren't commercials in the radio station, weather updates, reports, news bulletin kind of sound effects and things like that. But it's a whole lot of these really short tracks. That was Where Your Friends Are, fast. And coming up next, suspense.
Where your friends are.
That was nice. So that's all I recorded off that one, and I think I missed the needle drop when I set up this. Oh, here's disc 25, so it is more than 24 discs. This one's a bit more specific. So you have some of these that are, truckload sale, talking specifically about tires and brakes over here. One of my favorites on all of these is The Devil Made Us Do It, which I've used a couple of times before, I think. Some around clothes and other more, application-specific use cases for things. The other set of these that gets really, really fun, I think, is coming up next in my recording, as I just heard my needle change recorded, is literally just the alphabet on a vinyl. That was A. Coming up next, B. There it is. Now, why would you need all of these? Well, you're not going to be playing the individual vinyl record live when you're trying to host a radio show in the mid-'70s, which is where this particular set is. But you might cut it up, into tape and use these different things to build out an acronym or something like that for your channel, WBEZ or something like that. The other aspect of these, besides vocal slogans, these kind of get into instruments that a radio station might not have to be able to create sound effects. So there's a lot of these records that are like ARP and Moog generated sounds that might have lots of uses. So this is just the first couple on side A, I believe, if I recorded that right. Again, these really just generic classic sounds that, you know, it might be hard for the radio station or weird for a radio station to have a synthesizer hand to create some sound effects. So here is a sample pack on vinyl record that they could use if they wanted to apply some of these. Century 21 created a couple of different, at least that I'm aware of, collections. This one happens to be called Money Music. I've got another couple dozen of these records. These ones have a taped on printout of the different tracks. I don't have any of this recorded, but you can see how much Moog there is here of different possible uses and things. What you're hearing now is the direction that this particular sample pack, as I call it, collection goes into, which is like pure sound effects. So that is a Mechanical Toy track 11 on side A. We've got bugle calls, animal noises, horses trotting in different directions, water dripping, all these different kinds of things. And if you haven't noticed yet, this particular one, baseball pitcher, is really evident and showcases how stereo these sounds are. You know, that ball being hit is only in my right ear, and the pitcher machine is definitely in my left ear, which is really, really cool. This next track, or next album, this is still... Where are we at? Oh, that's Skee Ball Game from this one. Sounds like Skee Ball, right? So they're just recording these things that might be used for, or useful for the radio stations around the globe, syndicating this pack of records and selling them for their use to create different production efforts. Here we have, I think next is Night Sounds. Which, I mean, for my particular case, not super useful because I'm set up specifically so I can go take a, condenser mic outside and do field recording. But you can still understand why these might exist and why these would be super useful, right? This is Splice for the 70s. This is, in the 90s, this was on CD. But back in the record era, this was still happening. It was just being done on records, which I think is just incredibly, incredibly interesting. Up next, I think, is maybe one of my second favorite albums in this little part of my collection, which is this section down here on this miscellaneous. So this is Bones Crushing for 10 seconds. Great. But up next, I think just the differentiation between these different sounds and having to describe them is probably the silliest. So we've got bloops, blurps, boings again, theatrical boings, the shuffle and rattle boing, boing spin, boings and twangs, bonks, sour bonks, bomberang, bork, milk bottles being placed down, bounce boing, bow tang, bow wing, and etc. As those play out, there's kind of like 1/3 category. That is another couple dozen records that I have, which are kind of set lengths, typically 15, 30, and 60-second tracks that are kind of generically described to use as the backing music for what might be a live reading of an ad or a more complicated production of the different samples and slogans played over them. So this is Go Rock and Roll, which I think the other really neat thing here is the history of the radio DJ and actual producer putting down, we'll use this when we do the Country Inn ad. Here we have Memphis something, Citizens Bank of Edna. This was used maybe as late as 99, which is kind of crazy. I looked up Citizens Bank of Edna right before we're filming this, and it still exists and is in Missouri, which makes sense because I got these records from someone who was moving out of my apartment, an old friend. Thank you, Jeff. I still cherish them, even though maybe you forgot about them. And he kind of handed them to me on a whim of, hey, you want my records? And I said, sure, not really knowing what they were at the time. But now I hold on to them with a much, much tighter grip than I would have the 15 or so years ago that I got them. I think I've recorded both of these onto this particular loop But then we'll talk about what we're going to do next. Porch swing's kind of neat. So the actual goal for the video today is to pick one of these, re-record a loop that is just that, so I don't have this super long loop that's playing. And we're going to use this case to transform it into something new. I'm not sure when I'm going to record. After this, I'll cut to a kind of patch from scratch with that recording looped here, and we'll take it somewhere. And I just want to talk a little bit about this, library of media as a thing that I find fascinating, as an example of history, as this physical resource that I, don't have memorized. I don't know everything that's in there. And it's just so neat to be able to pull out a record, put it on, and then just work with whatever comes out the other side and try and turn it into something. And it's one of those things that kind of continually sparks that creativity for me, and especially one of the things that has driven how I've come to build this case, and how I like to spend my time, with synthesis too. So that was the end of the loop. If you stayed through all of those examples, thank you. And now let's get into some patching. Okay, so I decided to go with just that last track that we heard. And so I've cleared out the looper and I've resampled just that. If we turn our... There we go. While that's playing, I did want to show off one thing I forgot to show earlier, which is how silly some of these records look. Like, look how empty that is. You can see the tracks there, as they're all pretty short at the edge, and then it's just a ton of empty space. Some are even more extreme than that, which I think is interesting. I'm not sure why they would have done that versus, packing more on there. Maybe it's a limit of how many track listings they can write on the back of the album cover. I don't know. All right, so we've got the exact same patch that we had before, where I'm just coming out of the looper into the top row of the matrix mixer, and that's coming down right now just directly into the wave recorder, which is how you're hearing this, because I just record right off there. So the first thing I'm going to do, which is like a cheat code, is just half speed that. Now with some smaller cables, we're going to do a little adjustment to the end of chain here. I think I'm actually going to take this original signal. If you watch my recent videos, you've probably seen me patch this up just like this recently. Instead of going directly into the wave recorder, I've got a little bit of an end of chain setup that I do here because I don't master my files. I don't do anything other than take a stereo mix out of my case and pop it into a video editor to align it with the video footage that I'm recording right now. In fact, Ableton is open to record my voice, and that's about it, which I think is kind of silly. The process here that I'm setting up at the end before the wave recorder is Librelegio to do a bit of limiting, compression, and add some color, which is their term, but I do quite like the term. Ooh. Before I'm going to go to the Librelegio, I take a 30 dB cut with Shack Band High Pass, and before that, I do kind of my final mix bus. Not even a bus. The entire mix goes through Starlab. I don't always do that, but that's what I'm going to do right now. And before Starlab, I'm going to go through Jumblehenge. So I'll essentially use Jumblehenge to merge all of the different audio that I want. And at this point, we've got that slowed down loop. And I'll start taking the same slowed down audio and routing it to a couple of different places. sounds nice. Something about just half speeding things that just sounds good. Especially with all of the different artifacts that the vinyl gives off. These little flickers and crackles and... Alright, so I just patched up the kind of second column of the matrix mixer into panharmonium, and I'm going to just go right into double hinge directly for this. So let's pull back our essentially dry signal from the looper. And here is just the panharmonium signal. I'm going to do a lot of blur and a lot of feedback. Maybe let's also slow down how often it's sampling. So panharmonium works by looking at little windows of audio that you can choose how often it's doing that. You can trigger it, you can align it to BPM. Often if you want to recreate the sound source as close as possible, you want to be sampling as fast as possible and using as many oscillators to recreate the waveform in as many, as frequently as possible here, like every 17 milliseconds, I believe is how fast that's running. Now if I turn down the blur, turn down feedback, you can you get this cool time stretch taken out, Starlab. If we layer back in the dry signal, by dry signal I mean the slowed down, which is also pitched down version for the looper. Let's take some of those oscillators away. Not sure where we're going with this yet, but let's just chase that. I might cut this loop way down because we're just hearing the whole 60-second track right now, which is probably not how I want to do this in the end. All right, take another column out of the matrix mixer, and this time let's just grab beads. I'll probably put panharmonium back into a lower octave here in a second because I just find beads does better at higher octave stuff, and panharmonium does both really well. And so let's make this extra noisy. Let's change the loop a bit. Let's maybe make it way shorter. It's going to be easier to do that if we're just looking at the You know what? I might want to actually set this up to play different loop points, because that sounds kind of fun. As repetitive as that is. So let's grab this first row and use it to control the start point. So now each of these knobs across the first row of pressure points will choose a different start point for our loop. You can hear this a little better if we make the loop really small. One of the things I often do when I do this is also patch in the kind of shared gate out of pressure points into the re-trigger. That way you can kind of tap around and find something that's nice. Too far. Just kind of trying to find something that I like. Again, that you'd have more, granularity and the ability to fine tune this kind of a pseudo granular, very, very slow granular, pebular. What's bigger than a grain? Stonular method with another module or another pair of modules. You can even do this a little better on beads. But I like this relationship between these two modules so much. In this case, is really designed around not having control over every single little thing and just kind of having to be okay with that. I think we need some distortion. briefly. Do I want to distort everything? How do I want to do this? I think I might set up a pretty similar patch to actually how I had the other day, if I can find some more longer cables. And that was by leveraging the distortion as a additional kind of send with the matrix mixer. So I'm going to put it in the fourth column here, take the out of that, run it into the distortion, and then take that back out into another row of the matrix mixer. I'll put a little link up there with, like I'm sure I've done many times in this video, to that video where I talk specifically about adding the matrix mixer to this case and what it's going to do and enable things, enabled to be done differently. Just as a quick little demo here, what we should be able to see now, if we take some of, let's see, am I doing this right? Whoop, no, forgot to plug the cables I unplugged that I didn't need to back in. All right. So, just to demonstrate that distortion send, let's turn that off. All right. Turn everything else off. Here's that dry loop. Now I'm going to send the dry loop at kind of full volume down this column into the distortion, and I'm going to choose how much of the distortion comes back out into the dry loop again. I could cut the dry loop completely out there. I think I might do something like that with low color. We'll see. Just do distortion pandemonium, try everywhere else. That's nice. I could listen to that for too long. Let's get some feedback on beats. Clipping a little bit, so I'll bring that down. Just out of curiosity, let's hear that full loop. the distortion, the dry loop through. I just wanted to hear Pandemonium on its own. Just to really mess things up. I also find it fun to unsync these two sides of the deck, and then let's just make the other one play backwards. So now one ear, left ear is going forwards at half speed, and the right ear is going backwards. So we dial back everything now. It's nice, starting this process and not having any plan. This case just takes you somewhere. Thanks for watching. Until next time.